On the seventh day of the government shutdown, the impact of the standoff in Washington was being felt far beyond the halls of Congress, spreading to airports and federal offices across the country. Gio Benitez reports that the Federal Aviation Administration has issued a warning about potential staffing shortages at major air traffic control hubs including Newark Liberty International Airport, Houston's George Bush Intercontinental Airport, Chicago's O'Hare International, and McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas. These warnings come as an increasing number of air traffic controllers have called out sick, a sign of growing frustration and fatigue among federal workers who have now gone more than a week without pay. The FAA stressed that safety remains its top priority, but the agency acknowledged that thin staffing could lead to delays and disruptions during one of the busiest travel periods of the year. Sources inside the FAA say supervisors have been forced to reassign controllers from less congested airspaces to major hubs just to keep operations running. Some airports have already reported longer wait times on the ground and occasional rerouting of flights to avoid overburdened control centers. The union representing air traffic controllers has voiced alarm, warning that the longer the shutdown drags on, the more strain will be placed on a system that relies on precision and full staffing. Many controllers are showing up for work despite not being paid, citing their duty to public safety, but morale is sinking quickly. Several controllers told ABC News anonymously that the stress is becoming unbearable, with some struggling to cover basic expenses such as childcare and mortgage payments while still managing the pressure of ensuring air safety for thousands of passengers each day. Meanwhile, Rachel Scott reports that President Trump has suggested that some of the approximately 750,000 federal workers currently furloughed or working without pay might not receive back pay once the government reopens. Speaking to reporters outside the White House, the president defended his position on border security funding, stating that the government will remain closed until Congress agrees to allocate money for the proposed wall along the southern border. His comments sparked outrage among federal employees and lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. Historically, Congress has approved back pay for furloughed workers after previous shutdowns, but Trump's suggestion that this might not happen this time has created deep anxiety within the federal workforce. Many workers who thought they would eventually be compensated for lost time are now unsure if their financial struggles will ever be fully recovered. Unions representing government employees quickly condemned the remarks, calling them cruel and dismissive of the sacrifices made by public servants who keep essential services running. Across the country, stories are emerging of federal employees' struggle. In Sacramento, California, a tragic scene unfolded when a medical helicopter carrying 3 people crashed onto a busy highway, sending shockwaves through the community and shutting down traffic for hours. Matt Gutman reports that the helicopter, identified as an air ambulance operated by a regional medical transport company, was en route to a nearby hospital when it suddenly lost altitude and went down near an overpass. Witnesses described the terrifying moment when the aircraft descended rapidly, spinning before hitting the roadway with a loud explosion that could be heard blocks away. Miraculously, despite the dramatic crash, authorities said all 3 people on board, the pilot, a flight nurse, and a paramedic, survived the initial impact, though each sustained injuries of varying severity. First responders rushed to the scene within minutes, battling flames and thick smoke as they pulled the survivors from the wreckage. The cause of the crash remains under investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board and the Federal Aviation Administration, both of which have dispatched teams to examine the debris and gather flight data. Early reports suggest the helicopter may have experienced mechanical trouble or a sudden loss of power, but officials caution that it is too soon to determine the exact cause. The crash occurred during morning rush hour on a stretch of highway often filled with commuters, but in what many are calling a miracle, no vehicles on the ground were struck. Traffic, however, came to a standstill for several miles in both directions, creating gridlock that lasted well into the afternoon. Motorists described scenes of confusion as police and firefighters cordoned off the area, diverting cars onto side streets while helicopters from local news stations circled overhead capturing aerial footage of the smoking wreckage. Emergency crews worked for hours to contain leaking fuel and remove debris from the roadway. The medical helicopter had been transporting equipment but not a patient at the time of the crash, which officials say likely prevented a greater tragedy. The pilot, who has more than a decade of experience flying emergency medical aircraft, reportedly managed to steer the helicopter away from traffic lanes in a final effort to avoid civilian casualties, an action that investigators believe may have saved multiple lives. The governor of California issued a statement praising the courage and professionalism of first responders and offering support to the injured crew and their families. Hospitals across the state expressed solidarity with the medical flight community, noting that air ambulances are often lifelines for patients in critical need, especially in rural or hard-to-reach areas. The crash has reignited discussions about the risks faced by medical flight crews who operate in challenging conditions, often at night, through unpredictable weather, and under intense pressure to save lives. According to Federal D. As the nation absorbed the impact of both the government shutdown and the Sacramento helicopter crash, the conversation began to shift from immediate crisis management to broader reflection on what these events revealed about the state of governance, public safety, and national morale. Across the country, frustration and uncertainty filled the air as hundreds of thousands of federal workers waited for clarity about their futures. In airports, national parks, and federal buildings, signs of strain were visible everywhere. The shutdown, which had started as a political standoff over border security, had now evolved into a test of endurance for ordinary citizens. Travelers stranded by delayed flights expressed growing anger toward Washington, while air traffic controllers, TSA agents, and federal employees pleaded for resolution. On social media, hashtags like #EndTheShutdown and #PayThemNow began trending, as families shared stories of skipped mortgage payments, missed medical appointments, and mounting anxiety. Political leaders continued their war of words, each blaming the other for the ongoing paralysis. In the White House, President Trump remained defiant, repeating that border security was non-negotiable, while congressional Democrats insisted the government must reopen before any funding discussions could proceed. The stalemate left Americans caught in the middle, many questioning whether political pride had eclipsed public duty. Analysts on major news networks debated how long the system could hold before serious damage occurred to public trust. Economists warned that every additional day of shutdown risked billions of dollars in lost productivity and consumer confidence. Meanwhile, the FAA's warnings about staffing shortages seemed increasingly urgent, as weather systems moved across the country threatening to compound flight disruptions. The Sacramento helicopter crash had become a symbol of fragility. A moment when all the weaknesses in the system were laid bare. Commentators pointed out that while the crash itself may not have been directly caused by the shutdown, it illustrated how a nation stretched thin can no longer afford complacency. Local communities rallied around the survivors, organizing fundraisers and support drives, while in Washington, lawmakers traded statements of sympathy but little tangible action. The contrast between words and deeds grew sharper each day. For many Americans, the shutdown was more than a policy dispute, it was a mirror reflecting deeper divisions in national priorities. Teachers, nurses, and government workers joined together in peaceful demonstrations across several states, demanding that leaders put people before politics. In major cities, candlelight vigils were held for both the victims of the helicopter crash and the thousands of families enduring economic hardship. The sense of unity that arose from shared struggle stood in stark contrast to the discord in the Capitol. As the days stretched on, H.